The 2023 NFL Draft is almost here, and with the first overall selection, the Carolina Panthers appear all set to take Bryce Young. Houston Texans, you're on the clock. In this video, I'm going to break down why the Panthers might have liked Bryce Young just a little bit more than CJ Stroud. If it were a few weeks ago, I would have included a lot of information about willlevis and anthonyrichardson as well, especially after the way they tore down the house at the Combine.
Anthony Richardson did the thing. William Levis, my Mayo King.
Is anyone else getting deja vu? For some reason, this draft seems like it could turn out a lot like the 2021 draft. For example, Bryce Young was the number one prospect a year before this draft, just like Trevor Lawrence was the number one prospect a year before his draft. The Jets desperately wanted Trevor Lawrence, but they screwed up their tank job and fell to second in the draft order. Much like the Texans wanting Bryce Young, accidentally falling to second in the draft after pointlessly beating the Bears in the final game of the season. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields were largely viewed as prospects number 1 and 2 in college, until the draft, when Justin Fields was usurped by a late riser. Similarly, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud were viewed as prospects number P and poop. But now, it seems like a late riser could make Stroud the third or fourth quarterback drafted. The late risers for each respective year were Zach Wilson and potentially Anthony Richardson this time around, neither of which should have been drafted or should be drafted in the top 5. That's nothing to do with talent. It's everything to do with the immense amount of expectations and pressure that's placed on these young quarterbacks. I didn't wish failure upon Wilson. I don't wish failure upon Richardson. What's going to matter the most is what situation he goes to, and hopefully he can be drafted into a situation where his expectations are low and he can be properly managed. Edited for update. I said that Anthony Richardson was a late riser when I was recording this, and he was, but now it's Will Levis. Continue. But I do want to say something about Will Levis. I have one very tiny minor request, and it's not that he stops putting mayo in his coffee. I don't care. It's that he go by Bill instead of Will. So when he starts his rap career, he can transpose the letters of his first and last name and be Lil Beavis.
I am the great Coltolio. Me need mayo for my coffee. Are you threatening me? Me need mayo for my coffee.
But anyway, let's talk about Stroud and Young. Bryce Young had a fantastic year in 2021 and he even won the Heisman. And he was easily the number one prospect in 2023, leading up to the Combine, until he measured in at 5'10". At that point, all the Tinderats started swiping left. They couldn't get their story straight on whether it was his height that was the problem, or if it was his frame, which is his combined height and weight. So the initial rejection was on the basis that he would be too short to see over the massive NFL linemen, and his balls would get batted down at the line of scrimmage. I mean, those are salient points, except he's already proven he can find the throwing lanes in college because his Bama offensive linemen are very much the size of NFL linemen. And then as far as batted balls go, someone on Reddit did the math, they did the research. They found that height has exactly zero correlation to do with batted balls. So now all the criticism on Bryce Young is his quote-unquote slight frame and the concerns with durability. And to that, I say, well, running backs get tackled way more frequently than quarterbacks. Quarterbacks are super protected now. So, how did 5'9" Frank Gore have a 241 game career? How did 5'6", 190-pound Darren Sproles have 10 healthy years from 2007 to 2016? I mean, he's shorter and has a smaller frame than Bryce Young. Doesn't make sense. How did 5'11", 192-pound Tony Dorsett survive a much more violent NFL in the 1970s and 80s? It's almost the exact height and frame of Bryce Young. Also, Football Outsiders did a study on weight and injuries among NFL players. Ironically, they discovered that injuries increased with weight at just about every position. And if ever there were a team that would draft a short player, it's 100% the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers' motto is "Keep Pounding." Came up with that motto? It was created by a 5'9" tall Panther named Sam Mills. This is a man who was told many times that he was too small to play football. Nevertheless, he persisted. He proved people wrong at every level of the game and was enshrined at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2022. Another short great Panther? Steve frickin' Smith. John Gruden always called Steve Smith Freddy Krueger. At least that's what he called him on air. In emails, he had a much more spicy name for him. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if Wakanda was right, that brilliance at a short height is not always accepted by the elders. Okay, enough about Bryce Young. What about CJ Stroud? Well, he is a ball placement specialist. He can make every throw, and he elitely drops touch passes in the bucket all over the field. However, before this brief period leading up to the draft, Stroud wasn't really rated highly. That's because of a few factors. He was seen as inconsistent due to his play under pressure. There's also concern that his success is because he was in that Ryan Day scheme at Ohio State. It's a scheme that made Justin Fields look good. It's a scheme that made Dwayne Haskins look great. And there are worries that, Stroud isn't running the huddle, unlike Bryce Young. If we go back in time just a little bit, Stroud wasn't considered a challenger to the throne of short king Bryce Napoleon Young. That was until the national championship. Don't believe me? Look at the Heisman votes. Heisman voting is done before the national championship game. Stroud was so unimpressive to the voters that he received fewer votes than Max Duggan of TCU. Duggan may not even be drafted on day 2. So what was different about the national championship game versus all the other games that CJ Stroud played is that Stroud suddenly morphed into an effective running quarterback, and he led Ohio State to score 41 points against one of the best defenses in college football. But Ohio State still lost. And then you might say, well, Bryce Young also lost to Georgia in the national championship. And that's true. He lost the year previous, but he also beat Georgia that same year. And seemingly he only lost the national championship because he was missing his top 2 wide receivers. In fact, Bryce Young may have done enough to actually win that game anyway through a beautiful pass that definitely would have been caught by one of his top 2 wide receivers. And it would have given Alabama a much better chance of winning. If we break down Stroud's national championship game, Stroud marched them down the field to the 32-yard line with 28 seconds left. And I hate to say it, but it looked like he panicked under pressure, and that prevented Ohio State from gaining any more yards. They couldn't gain a single yard more. And that's despite Georgia's defense being completely gassed on this drive. Georgia's defenders were laying on the field multiple times gasping for air. I mean, on Stroud's big run, the one that got them to field goal range, the defender had Stroud dead to rights. The guy just stumbled over himself, and that's what allowed Stroud to make the big play. And sure, yeah, the Ohio State kicker's final kick was absolutely horrendous. But he was attempting a 50-yarder. Maybe he doesn't freak out and completely miss the kick if it's a 40-yarder. I mean, they ran 3 plays and got nowhere. And this isn't even counting the fact that in Ohio State's final 5 drives, they didn't do anything besides punt and field goal attempt. Ohio State was leading handily in the third quarter, and they blew it in their final 5 drives. Sorry, not sorry. This is just one more log on the fire of Stroud can't beat good teams. I mean, look at Stroud's record versus ranked teams. He was 5-4. Bryce Young's record versus ranked teams was whopper, 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 double, Damn it! Hate when that happens. Anyway, Bryce Young's record versus ranked teams was a whopping 10-3. So there's this theory that Ryan Day was preventing Stroud from running until the national championship game. And people are thinking when Stroud hits the NFL, he's going to morph into this perfect running quarterback, or at least become a dual threat quarterback. Okay, if that's true, why did Ryan Day allow Justin Fields to run plenty when he was the quarterback at Ohio State? If Ryan Day didn't want CJ Stroud to run the ball, why did he call designed quarterback run plays versus Georgia in the national championship? Why did CJ Stroud basically say after the Nebraska game, "It's not my job to run the ball"? And why was CJ Stroud not even a running quarterback in high school? It's because CJ Stroud is not a natural running quarterback. If anything, I believe Ryan Day knew the best way to combat Georgia's pressure was to make his quarterback run the ball. And it worked. It worked incredibly well. He still lost, but all I'm saying is don't expect Stroud to run a lot in the NFL. Speaking of the Georgia game, I noticed Stroud's drives always seemed to stall if Georgia sacked him. So I looked at all of his sacks from 2022. And ironically, what I thought was damning evidence for CJ Stroud actually turned out to be damning evidence for Bryce Young. So 89% of Bryce Young's drives stalled if he got sacked in 2022. whereas that figure was only 75% of CJ Stroud's drives. I don't really know what's a normal rate for this stat, but I also noticed that Bryce Young was taking a lot of third down sacks, so I broke it down further and created a new stat called overcomable sacks. So when we do that math, we can see CJ Stroud overcame his early down sacks 43% of the time, whereas Bryce Young only was able to do it 22% of the time. It's a really interesting stat that I think should be used more often, and so far it's the only thing I've seen that makes me worry just a little bit about Bryce Young. Another interesting stat is time to throw. So when talking about time to throw, it's not useful to just say that the average time to throw in the NFL is X amount of seconds. There's a range that usually depends on passing yards per attempt. So for example, CJ Stroud had a time to throw of 2.92 seconds last year, and his yards per attempt were 9.5 yards. In the NFL, he would either have to get that time to throw down to 2.65 seconds, or reduce his average yards per attempt, or basically face an incredibly high pressure rate and get sacked way more than usual and have a miserable life. This is something we saw happen to a lot of rookie quarterbacks. It happened to Justin Fields. If you look at Justin Fields' college time to throw, it was 3.1 seconds, and his average yards per attempt was 9.3 yards in college. In the NFL, the yards per attempt dropped to 7.1 yards, and he's scrambled a whole lot. Now, some of you that know the time to throw stat are screaming already and saying Bryce Young has a higher time to throw than Stroud at 3.02 seconds. Great, you know your stats, but they're not the same at all. When you watch a lot of Stroud dropbacks, you're seeing CJ Stroud standing in a clean pocket, waiting for one of his reads to open up. However, when you watch a game of Bryce Young, a common theme you'll see on Bryce Young's dropbacks is he's facing pressure relatively quickly, and then of course he starts scrambling, and magically he finds someone open on the field that he shouldn't even be able to see. And I believe that's why he's got a higher time to throw. I could be wrong. These could be rose-tinted glasses. I'm just saying it how I see it. And of course, both of them are going to have to speed up their time to throw in the NFL. I just think it's less concerning for Bryce Young because of his Houdini-like skills in scrambling and navigating the pocket. And then we have player comps. These are basically useless. It's comparing past players or current players, in some cases, to the prospect. So for example, some player comps I've seen for CJ Stroud are Jared Goff, an athletic Matt Ryan, Alex Smith, Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott, Derek Carr, and then player comps for Bryce Young. It's usually guys like Patrick Mahomes if he was still a baby, Kyler Murray who runs less, anorexic Russell Wilson, short Steve Young, and just normal regular Drew Brees. I did notice there's a common theme here. For almost all of the comps for Bryce Young, they've won a Super Bowl, and literally none of the comps for Stroud have. I don't know if that's saying something, but I think subconsciously it is. So from that, it seems like the choice should be obvious. And nevertheless, the baseless height attacks on Bryce Young just keep on rolling in. I mean, he's proven he can play at a high level at 5'10". At some point, this is just a bunch of height supremacists mocking his cosmetic appearance. It'd be like someone attacking CJ Stroud for his appearance. Like, look at this dude. Look at this dude. He went to his barber and said, "Give me the Scooby-Doo. Give me the Scooby-Doo." I mean, it's 2023, and he's out here rocking the Shaggy. He even caught me on the counter.
It wasn't me. They call me Mr. Bombastic.
And that would just be so mean. I would never say such things. In all honesty, I do think CJ Stroud has a chance to have a fantastic career in the NFL. I mean, he could have a career very similar to Jared Goff. Jared Goff did make it to a Super Bowl. Or he could be like a Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott was highly revered until this past year, or 2 years ago. But of course, like all these quarterbacks, what matters the most is what situation he ends up in. I think CJ Stroud has a much higher chance of succeeding if he lands on the Colts or the Seahawks. There are rumors that the Texans aren't even interested in CJ Stroud, so it might be good news for Stroud. I don't think he would do well in the Texans. And like I said with the 2021 comparison, it's entirely possible Anthony Richardson gets drafted ahead of CJ Stroud this year. I could break down some things about Richardson, but I think this video is long enough. Best of luck to all this year's draft quarterbacks. And congratulations to Bryce Young for becoming the newest Carolina Panther. In West Philadelphia, born and raised, Tuscaloosa was where I spent my college days. Chilling out, maxing, relaxing, roll tide. We was passing the football around outside when a couple of bulldogs who were up to no good started making trouble in my neighborhood. I lost one little game. My coach threw a fit. He said, "You're going out with Scotty and Frank to Charlotte." I pulled up to the draft about 7 or 8, and I yelled to the cabbie, "Yo, Stroud, smell you later." I looked at my stadium. I was finally there to sit on my throne, the short king of the Thairs.